What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. What's had more chances than Social Security and more collectibles than Nicolas Cage? That's right, it's Assassin's Creed, that venerable series of Assassin vs. Templar titles that has brought us more than 10 games. It might as well be Madden Catch the Ball or Get Shivved edition by now. Let's see if Origins tells the tale of the creation of the two orders well, or if it's just Dumb and Dumber the game. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Assassin's Creed Origins, the birth of Chuck Norris, Prince of Persia 8, the Egyptianing, and the excellence of hireable hyenas. Graphics are up first. Really, regardless if you're on your PS4 or the PC or the Xbox One, the attention to complexity in Origins is actually hard to miss, and even harder to come to grips with at first. When most folks think of a game set in the Middle East, they think of pyramids, maybe riding on the head of a sphinx, and then that's about it. But Ubisoft's attention to detail in making a breathtaking and truly massive world is one of the highlights of this title. From shifting dunes with sand whipping across to the occasional seagoing battles with this translucence of thin green light that passes through the tops of the waves, Origins is a looker. It's not only the fact that it offers this massive land to traverse, it's in the defined differences of their locations and how they meld into one overall. For example, some of the deserts are so long that you can end up having hallucinations if you stay in the sun for too long, and you might go from there and enter a thick oasis and its buildings and inhabitants, reflecting that higher quality of life through cultivated herds of animals and masses of small fishing vessels and spots near the tributary or the lake. And while Assassin's Creed's always been about the vertical, its softer use on Origins works wonders, where there are some massively tall buildings and not a small number of historical monuments to climb. It's how they all fit together that works so well here. This is a land that is far more seamless than most that have come before it in the series, and you can find yourself traversing massive fields, climbing a guard tower, skirting along its edge, and then climbing a massive sheer face up onto the enemy's stronghold, and then finding yourself dropping into a lush courtyard, all in the same minute. And while this is done in some past titles, at least to some point, the complexity and just overall level of detail in what's going on in Origins is so dramatically increased that at times it seems like it might be the first time you've done it. Now, jump into animation for a second. Much has been said about the new fighting system, and I will get to it more in the gameplay, but I do have to say that parry, blocking, dodging, and so forth have a speed to them that's never really existed in the Assassin's Creed titles, and the animation of the lead character lends a weight and feel to the game that works incredibly well, even at that increased speed. Each weapon has its own unique feel and weight to them as well, from the quick twitch, multi-arrow shooting bows to the bigger predator bows with longer pullback and an almost grunting straight up kind of effort from the character's physique. And there's all these little elements like how arrows move more and more in the quiver as their numbers dwindle, or the particulate of sand that not only spills around a horse's legs as you go across the desert, but it actually does so according to the anatomy, coming off at an angle and filtering around the foreleg and the knee. Also, bravo to Ubisoft for an insane draw distance on many of the items, and an improved overall graphics model, which it doesn't destroy pop-in, but it does stop a good deal of that flickering that we see in some games when moving slowly, where rough calculations cause shadows to flicker, even sometimes if you were stopped. That ugly look is almost gone here. Now, pop-in itself still does happen, especially when you ride super fast or sprint through some of the more incredibly lush areas. This is something different. This is just that shadow flicker that would occur when you were looking at something far away. Sadly, that does not mean everything is perfect here. The game does drop frames from time to time, and while not egregious while sprinting into an incredibly dense area, you can sometimes feel the groan of the systems as it's trying to draw 45 hyenas, 18 buildings, 200 NPCs, and an assassin who had one bad thing happen to him, so they decided to absolutely crater the entire land in a search for vengeance. Supposedly, another patch is planned for just after launch that might clean this up a bit. It never really detracts from the gameplay, but occasionally it occurs and it's certainly noticeable. When it comes to true performance, the PS4 Pro at 1080p seems to take the cake with very few FPS drops, and that's mimicked across the PS4 normal. At 4K checkerboard on the Pro, it stays firm, but it does have a couple drops from time to time, especially when flying the bird around. Now, the PC version should be doable at 1080p 60 FPS if you have a current or a last generation processor and at least a 1070. One thing to remember is that Ubisoft does plan ahead for a lot of their graphical effects, so you probably won't be able to set things at uber level. As a package, I really liked Origins, even better than the cluttered world of Syndicate, and you guys know how much I like that. It makes the wide open areas of Assassin's Creed 3 sort of appear like nothing more than a boring simulator. Now, it's not going to be for everyone, but its diverse locations and just incredible swath of different areas to engage in really made the world interesting to me, and I loved some of the improvements on animations and different characters as well. Sound, music, and voice.
All in there?
They are.
I guess you can copy this then.
Too late. Don't want it.
Go ahead, take it.
No!
Well done, my friend. Our hero returns. You brought joy to Siwa.
I should get to Alexandria. I need to see Aya.
Don't be in too much of a hurry. Siwa will always need its Magi.
That's where she went.
Please get me out!
And of course, let's do sound first. This is excellent, and it's not just that whipping a 45-pound hammer into someone's skull sounds like an audio engineer had a field day in someone's pumpkin patch. It's channel separation that is incredibly wide and mixed with options for low and high dynamic sound production, and you really do have this interesting and incredibly useful soundscape. I can't count the times I came into a swampy area and heard the far-off splashes of hippos terrassing through the local villagers, prompting me to run and save them, or the scuffle of feet of an enemy as he tried to get behind me in an attack in an enclosed area. The number of times the audio actually saved me in Origins was incredibly high, especially the way the new battle system worked and the new lethality there. The sound definitely helped. And of course that brings us to voice. Bravo to Ubisoft for, at least for the most part, trying to give the flavor of accent to their characters finally. You know how it is. Past games, it wasn't surprising to find some character deep from South America sounding like he came from London, or Middle Eastern lords getting hot and heavy in a cutscene as they prep to kill someone and sounding far more like a bad guy from a Star Wars movie. Here in Origins, many of the locals and your character and those that you meet all have accents that at least come far closer to resembling those that you would find in the area, and it does a tremendous job solidifying the location in your ear than, say, some titles prior. One thing I did notice is that the writing continues to be far more modern than it actually feels like it should be. And yes, I get it. You don't want gamers to play through an entire adventure like they were reading 1001 Nights, but seeing odd slang become the norm is just weird, and hearing some character say he was creeped out just seemed like it didn't fit. It's a small quibble, but it was noticeable for me. And of course, that brings us to music. What can I say? When it plays, it's absolutely excellent. It has a wide variety of native tones and instruments, and you get a soundtrack that sounds era-appropriate, but also subtly different. And the fade-in system here, whether it be a bit of lonely strings as you flit from bush to bush on your trek to single-handedly remove all life from a local area, or if you're just riding your horse along the dunes and find a small outpost and horns creep up on you as you discover it's not just an outpost, but some massive enemy stronghold. It's well done stuff. I love how they also mend in current day sounds and synths layered on top of those moments in the game, offering an interesting feel of past and present coming together. It also gets out of the way very often. In fact, to me, maybe too often. Depending on how you explore, there can be long periods of time where there just isn't that much music, and it's just the lonely you and the landscape, and not really any accompanying music until maybe a stinger comes up because a hyena pack found you or a guard in a tower caught your movement. Now, I love systems and music that does this, but at times it actually felt a bit less interesting as a trip overall. I would say good music with a couple quibbles here and there. And of course, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. You play mostly as the Magi Bayak, and the game wastes no time literally throwing you into a story as he seeks vengeance for his son's death and then promptly loses its mind. Loosely based around finding those responsible, this is the first AC game since Ubisoft announced that they were going to try to focus more on the player as the story creator and not the story in the game itself. And I can say that seems like a wicked understatement. You'd have a better chance of sitting down with an abacus and suddenly understanding Jacobson's conjecture than what's going on here. At some point, I'm pretty sure it involved a celestial ovary and the bad guys from The Lion King, but that might have just been the 17 EpiPens I freebased whenever a cutscene boringly started. Bayak just isn't that interesting as a character, nor is his motivation, and their attempt at a couple twists both mid-game and nearing the end didn't actually do it for me, while the very ending made me go, most of the time I was just saying, okay. Now as Bayak, it's your job to burn, bash, bludgeon, cut, club, slash, slice, skewer, punch, and pierce enemies until they're dead in the time-honored fashion of sneaking behind them and introducing their sweetmeats to the open air. Now, as you level up, you gain ability points that can be used in the skill trees for Hunter, Warrior, or Seer. With Hunter and Warrior having the typical ranged and tank style skills that are useful, like shooting or holding more arrows, leaping off buildings, and able to slow motion or range shot, or even have more attacks in a combo or special shield breaking maneuvers when battling some of the big and heavies. And those are all, like I said, useful as you climb up the rung of dead bodies you leave behind you like a damned pyramid making ramp. The last, and to me the most interesting, is Seer. Now this is sort of a mix with my favorite, the ability to tame animals and have them fight by your side. You can also turn enemies against themselves with a mysterious concoction I can only assume is 1 part bath salts, 1 part meth. And my favorite, the ability to buy war chariots, because as we all know, 2 horses pulling a battering ram made of wood and steel is just screaming stealth. But sometimes you gotta go loud, and that brings us to battle and the much coveted improvements, and there are some. First, I have to say, the speed is increased, and as a whole, you just feel overall faster and smoother with the ability to dodge 3 times around the battlefield before needing a moment for that to refresh, and I like it. Dashes can be combined with attack buttons to do an assortment of moves, and of course you can buy skills like parry, which leaves enemies open for attacks, or just whittle away at them with strikes, or perhaps use your adrenaline-based moves, which are based on the weapon type and do various things depending on that weapon type, like make you move and dodge even faster, hit harder, become somewhat immune to incoming damage for a second, so forth. Now, battle's sort of the lock-on and circle-around kind of battle systems we've seen before. You can use keys to switch to different enemies or the right thumbstick if you're using a controller. Also, let's be honest, Assassin's Creed games have always had an issue where somehow the bad guys always hire the most cowardly dudes who spend more time crapping themselves silly until there's an opening, leaving this odd pace to combat where 5 guys would come into battle and each would attack separately like a Mortal Kombat leaderboard. And you're going to find yourself being attacked from 2 to 3 different directions from different enemies all the time here. It is the new norm. Now, you lock on, you perform your moves, and of course you hope to kill the enemy. You build that adrenal meter, which then works for any weapon that you have. So that means that you can actually build it with your sword and switch out to the mace and use that special power with the mace, which I actually really liked as an option. Sadly, despite all those things, it never comes together. It goes from fun to infuriating, back to fun again, so often that it's crazy. The battle system's just too loose. And while it does open up combat, it also shows you a number of its weaknesses. For example, everyone can dodge, including enemies, but it seems like you're the only one who has a set number of times you can do it before there's a weird hesitation as you sort of rebuild that meter. With enemies from hyenas to hysterical best friends in fisticuff battles, dodging hundreds of times, resulting in this odd chasing way of playing the game, and switching from foe to foe to foe is never as seamless as it actually says it's gonna be. It's based on position and not range, which would be okay if it didn't then suddenly seem to be about range and not position. Switching enemies was a crapshoot. Also, the enemies now will chase you for goddamned ever. No kidding, forever. Seriously, forever. See a bandit in the desert and they eye you, they can chase you halfway across the desert and into the next town. Now that's not so bad with bandits, but when it turns out to be the militia, they have a tendency to draw other militia with them, and you're running through a city chased by 12 enemies, all somehow endowed with the ability to see through walls, and that can also be a bit frustrating. I also loved their increased range of perception. On all difficulties, by the way. These guys are highly trained eagle-eyed killers, and if you come out of a bush to aim a bow and you're anywhere in forward line of sight from them, expect them to see you instantly. But let's be honest, if an armored head and torso just magically popped out of a huckleberry bush, you'd probably notice it anyway. I would say this, I really enjoyed the new fighting system at times, until I didn't. Now, of course, it's time to talk about collectibles. And there are almost none. That's right, there are almost no collectibles. There are craftables, but the side missions that most Ubisoft games seem so enamored with, it's borderline stalkerish, are actually noticeably absent. That means no flying shanties or strangely placed feathers. Instead, almost everything you do is connected to a quest, and while some of those will have you gathering items, make no mistake, the majority have some kind of quest element to them at their target, like saving folks from alligator attacks, rescuing kidnapped villagers, and more. Side quests unlock both via a secretive group that gives you a spot in a local town and unlocks some of them, as well as resident ones that pop up as you travel around, all with a verbal component like eavesdropping in on conversations. It's actually a good improvement, and while the map mess is not wholly removed from Origins, it's actually a good sight less than the prior games. One place you do see repetition is where you find tombs. Now, there are a ton of these, and you go inside and you find that it's got a couple treasures inside that you seem to always need to find, and you need to work your way through that tomb. And the same thing can happen in many of the different enemy strongholds. So what's replaced it? Well, crafting, but crafting was already in some of these games. It's the same here. You find some animals or send your bird out to mark an animal, and it allows you to hunt down the creatures and kill them to craft things like arrow and upgrade your items. You can also break down any of the loot you find into various elements as well, which runs from swords to two-handed swords, blunt, and a series of bow types. One thing that I absolutely liked is the system allows for you to not really worry about the clothing you're wearing, as the breastplate and its level as well as your shield actually adjust your armor, and those are upgraded using crafting. So if you want to just run around wearing a bath towel, you can go for it. That is actually carried into the weapon system as well. Every weapon can be upgraded to your current level, or you can just find and buy new ones. So if you like a particular one, you can upgrade it as you level up as well, though it is pretty costly. Now, when it comes to game size and length, the game is stunningly huge as a location, and the appearance of one huge land is magnified by the excellent work I already talked about between the locations and how it smoothly transitions from place to place to place. However, if you're just in it for the story, the game is actually not incredibly long. It's sort of like Syndicate. There's an absolute boatload of things to do, but the main story is just a little over 20 hours. Doing every side mission is going to easily double that though, especially if you don't synchronize or use fast travel. Now, lastly, there are some mini games. There's a naval component, but it's not as in-depth as Black Flag, and there's another mini game which is chariot racing, which is basically Fast and the Fragile Six without Vin Diesel mumbling it's all about family. Imagine racing around dirt-filled tracks with 4 scared horses pulling chariots with the structural capacity of a Fabergé egg. That's about what you have. It can be fun if you like that kind of thing, or not if you don't. And that's the thing about Origins. There's a lot of give and take here and a lot of changes, but one thing absolutely hampered my enjoyment. It's the repetition. Now, it's not based on the collectibles, but it's continued on the Club Med-like enemies, the settlements and the guardhouses that positively choke the environment, with each offering a kill the captain and find some treasure kind of shakedown list, and it continues over and over and over. Lastly, bugs. Yeah, the game has them. Is it Unity? No, no game's Unity. The only game that would come close to being Unity is a game that was created just for bugginess. But you will see a huge number of oddities like pathing, odd collision detection, and a number of animation blending errors. For example, I had one error that required me to leave the game and reload because my assassin, the killer, stalker of the night, couldn't get off the friggin' building's edge and just kept smashing his shins like he was atoning for all the killing. And of course, that brings us to fun factor. This one's a bit different. I love the deeper emphasis on travel. I love the number of quests and the open-ended feel of the game. At the same time, for many of us, story does matter at least a little bit, and I can't help but feel that the story is easily the weakest here of any AC game prior. Almost nonsensical, and when you get to the end game, there's a couple moments where I'm sure some people are just going to be like, I'm sorry, what? Also, the combat, even fully loaded with most of the skills, it never felt as fluid as I think Ubisoft wanted it to. Using stealth to level the playing field's vital, and with some of the skills allowing you to see enemy paths and so forth, it can mitigate that weirdness to a particular level, but the hyper-aggressive bad guys mixed with just the way the game works, overall, I don't think a ton of people are going to really enjoy this change without a couple patches to fix some of that. Now, this game also has the microtransactions that we've expected since Black Flag and has been in all of them, which are the typical microtransactions that do speed up for people who maybe don't have the time others do. You can like it or hate it, but that's been in these titles for quite some time. They did actually also add one single special vendor inside the game where they sell a random weapon or equipment that is of incredibly high level, yes, for real money. So technically, loot chests. Take it as you will. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent being replaced by deep sale on the PC. This is actually a wait for a sale. Make no mistake, I loved a good deal of this game, and traveling across this world is so friggin' awesome looking. Unfortunately, that's offset by a battle system that just wasn't as slick as, say, Zelda's, which I think it's trying to crib from, and the bugs that obviously got in the way. The game looks absolutely beautiful at times, but it does have a couple issues with pop-in and so forth. I think this is a title that with a couple patches really could make me enjoy the part of the game that the game wants you to enjoy the most, at least when it comes to change, and that is the battle. It just has some issues right now. So that's it for me. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Twitter or Patreon. If you want to be a patron, it's how I continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Check it out. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.